We are in another session of compiler theory class, which is pretty interesting. I think all of you have understood by now that these things are pretty interesting. And I hope you will enjoy it. Most of the other years they do. So, but before I go into the classes today, the actual topics, let me announce two things. First, actually three things to be precise. First of all, this is only for group 3 students. Please listen carefully. I am going to be your mentor for this whole year. Okay, so that means whatever activity points you are accruing, please share with me as you go forward. Okay, or whatever you have done in past and whatever you are doing right now and planning in future. So each of you, please try to get some time from me. It could be during off hours like weekends. I don't care. Okay, so make sure that your activity points are all properly placed, because that is a must when you are graduating, unless you have fulfilled the requirement. I think all of you understand it, right? Right? Am I clear on that? Hello? Any response?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Mayank. So basically, only for group 3 students, you will talk to me. Okay. I'll be your mentor. Group 4, somebody else, I think it would be most probably ACS sir, Amitabh sir. He will he will contact you separately. But since I am taking your class, so I am taking this opportunity to connect with you. I'll be sending you relevant information, and whatever information you have, please send it. Okay. Second point is it seems that from 1st November onward, I don't know, the announcement has not been made. So I might go, we might have to go to office, means college, and we might have to take the class from there. So that would be a little different as far as the mode of teaching is concerned. It will be still online, but some things might change. So we have only the Tuesday and the Wednesday class next week, because after that we have the vacation, the small vacation. So be ready for that. And the third thing is, there is a class, you have a double lecture on Wednesday, that is on 3rd of November. That class is going to be held very much. Only thing is that I have some other work during the morning hours. So if I'm a little bit delayed, I'll let you know exactly at when we'll be starting. Since it will be still an online class, we can start a little late and we can continue a little later. Okay. So just these three pieces of information I had for you. So first thing is for group 3, the mentoring thing, the activity points. The second point is regarding the change in my uh, existence or position, whatever you call it, my presence. It won't be from home anymore, maybe from college, but there is no notice yet. And I think after another couple of weeks or so, you might be also instructed to come. So get ready for all those things, because it has been a while you are accustomed to the physical class. And the third thing is that on Wednesday, even though it is on the eve of Kali Puja, still we'll have the class, maybe a little late in the evening, maybe till 5 o'clock. So get ready for that. I mean, if you are planning for like crackers and things like that, just hold on a little bit. I should be able to complete by 5:15, not more than that. I should be able to do it on time. I mean, before 4 if possible. Okay, so let's go to the topic today. This is also going to be an introductory topic for today. We'll have the detailed discussion in next week and the week after that. That is parsers. So parsers, as you know, are nothing but the syntax analyzers. That means just like what lexical analyzers do, they use a regular expression-based approach, basically regular grammars, They basically recognize languages which are generated by those regular grammars. And one way to do that is via finite automata. We have already seen that. For the case of parsers, we'll be keeping our focus confined to uh, the context-free grammar. So context-free grammars, there will be corresponding rules. Here, there is no question of having an equivalent representation. Like in case of lexical analyzer, you had regular grammars, but the actual activity or the patterns were expressed in regular expression notation. In case of parsers, the context-free grammars, it's just a mapping from the actual grammar uh, to the activities. Okay, so what is done in Bison? So lex or flex was for the regular grammars, and Bison is for the context-free grammars. If you have a grammar which is not context-free, like as I said in my first class, C++ is not really context-free, you cannot use Bison. Bison is only specifically focused on creating the parser corresponding to context-free grammars. So this is what we are going to start today. So parsers are nothing but, you can think of context-free grammar handlers. Okay, that's what it is. Or context-free grammar processors. So it recognizes context-free languages. So any program you write is essentially a context-free language, which is a little funny because your program can be millions of lines of code, but still it is just a string in one of the context-free language. Please mind that. Whereas in case of lexical analysis, the length of the token is essentially generally finite. I mean, very small. So every programming language has precise grammar rules that describe the syntactic structure of well-formed programs. Okay, I'm not really going into rigorous discussions of what is well-formed programs and things like that. Generally, qualitative discussion, every programming language has precise grammar rules and it describes the syntactic structure. So this is a marked difference from lexical analysis, which is basically how the tokens, how the strings in that particular language are formed, whether they are well formed or not. Whereas in case of parsers, it actually checks the most important thing, whether your program is syntactically correct, whether you have placed the semicolon at the proper place, whether you are giving a closing brace or closing parenthesis for the corresponding open parenthesis or open brace, whether you are declaring a variable before it is used, whether your format for conditional statements and loop statements are correct. So all these things are basically part of the syntactic structure of your programming language, and you have to conform to that. You have already learned at least one language, which is C, maybe much more, maybe many more. So you know why it is so important to adhere to the syntactic structure of the programs. Okay, in fact, that is where you spent a lot of time in these last 3-4 years. So you can understand the importance. In C, the rules state how functions are made out of parameter lists, declarations, statements, how statements are made of expressions, etc. Please note this para carefully. That means basically you are talking about some kind of a recursive definitions, which is fundamental of context-free grammars, any context-free grammars, because they recurs on itself, recurs on themselves. Okay, so like for example, you can say a definition of an expression. We'll see one example here. What is an expression? Then you can say you have a grammatical rule for statements which are nothing but one expression or one expression followed by another statement. So it's that kind of a recursive definition we are talking about. Of course, we have declaration statements, we have functions, and what is not written here is that we have pointers, we have structures. So all these things have specific grammatical rules. And the corresponding action is something, what we'll learn as we go forward. Okay, grammars are easy to understand. So parsers for programming languages, as you can understand, are not very difficult to write. And in fact, there are tools which can automatically generate the parsers. Like, for example, Bison is one such tool where the input is essentially a context-free grammar and it generates the corresponding parser. So that's why Bison is known as parser generator. This is a very important tool, parser generator. So parser generators are tools which can automatically generate a parser, means how you handle handle the strings in a programming language or the constructs in a programming language. That's what it says. Okay, so basically parser is nothing but given an expression, given a string in a particular language, whether it belongs to that particular language or not. Okay, that is the task of a parser. So these parsers can be automatically constructed given an input context-free grammar specification. Bison is one such tool. We'll start with Bison in a couple of weeks, so just hold on a little bit. Parsers or syntax analyzers are generated for a particular grammar. Of course, that is true. And this is a very important statement. Context-free grammars are usually used for syntax specifications of programming languages. So that is something which is very helpful to us. Although not all programming languages are like that, but almost all programming languages are context-free grammars, have context-free grammars, can be generated out of context-free grammars. Okay, so that means writing such a grammar and writing the parser or generating the parser for such context-free grammars is easy because it is already automated. A parser for a grammar of a programming language, so these are the activities, verifies that the string of tokens for a program in that language can indeed be generated from that grammar. Note the terms here very carefully. String of tokens or stream of tokens, either way you say. So where did you get the tokens from? Where are the tokens coming from? So note that parser doesn't directly deal with the actual strings. It deals with the tokens. So who is generating the tokens? From the given
lexical analyzer.
Absolutely. So please note that parser cannot proceed unless it gets the string of tokens. So unless the lexical analyzer has already done its job, it won't be able to do anything. So that is what is very important. Please note that. Parsers are responsible for reporting any syntax errors in the program. The output of a parser is a parse tree representation of the program. Now, note that this need not be explicit. Like, it is not like what Lex does or lexical analysis does. It generates the tokens. But a parser may not output the parse tree. Okay, but it has to construct the parse tree to make sure that the program is syntactically valid. Okay.
The parser is also act as a lexical analyzer, no?
No, parser acts complementary to the lexical analyzer. So after the lexical analyzer has done its job, it has produced the set of tokens. The parser starts its activity, means it makes sure that those tokens are syntactically correctly placed. Okay.
মানে স্যার ধরুন মানে আমি যদি ধরুন সেমিকোলন মিস করে যাই তো এর কাজটা হচ্ছে পার্সারের ডিটেক্ট করা
একদম okay. In fact, that is a very secondary activity or tertiary activity of the parser. The primary activity will be clear to you as we go forward. The main activity of a parser is from a given programming language generate or help generate the corresponding intermediate code. That is basically the intermediate code generator phase, but the intermediate code generator and the parser works hand in hand. Okay, it's like they are close friend. So all the actions, I'll explain that, okay, as we go forward. There is no need to worry right now. Okay, usually calls the lexical analyzer to supply a token to it when necessary. So this is a difference also. What we have done so far is we have used Flex as a standalone program, but in general, it is not like that. In general, what happens is we generate the context-free grammar first, we write the rules for that, and the context-free grammar handles only tokens. So then only we define the tokens within Flex. And when we run the program, we run the parser first, it calls the lexical analyzer embedded into it, and then it verifies that the syntax is correct and generates the actions. I'll talk about the actions later when you talk about Bison and as we go forward with intermediate codes. And you know what is the tool to handle it? It is basically the push down automata. This is the machine for recognizing context-free languages. Okay. So what is the difference with finite state automata? Only one difference is that push down automata has memory and it is organized as stack. So this is the definition of context-free grammars. N is basically the finite set of non-terminals. A context-free grammar is a four tuple, as you can see. T is a finite set of terminals. So these terminals are nothing but the tokens which are generated by the corresponding lexical analyzer. N is the finite set of non-terminals. S is a subset of is a member of N and it is the start symbol. And P is nothing but finite set of productions. Can you tell me what is the speciality of production of context-free grammars? There is one speciality, very important speciality. Like regular grammars, there was a speciality. Similarly, context-free grammars, the production rules have a speciality. What is that? Yes? What is that? Yes? Any answer? How do you know that a grammar is context-free? Just by looking at the production rules. There is an easy one. I mean, it might not be always true, but just by a cursory glance at the set of production rules, you can immediately find out whether a grammar is not context-free or not. Whether it is context-free or not, that is difficult to prove. But easily checking the production rules, you can be sure that it is not context-free. What is that property?
Parse tray.
No, I'm talking about only the set of production rules. That is what is given. Like, for example, at the end of this particular PPT page, you can see there are two rules given, a set of two rules given. One is for E, another is for S. I mean, whether these are context-free grammars or not, I don't know. But certainly there is something here which, if there was a violation of that, then it would have been non-context-free. Like, for example, suppose I do this. Is it going to be a context-free grammar? S is a non-terminal, E is a non-terminal. Have you seen this kind of a thing in context-free grammar?
No, S2 some no sir, only one non-terminal on
Yes.
the left-hand side.
Absolutely. I think it is Aditi, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that is the observation. A context-free grammar can never have more than one non-terminal on the left-hand side of the production. Now, why it is so important, it will become obvious as we go forward, but just think about this. So suppose you are given E and you want to find out the corresponding leaves using the parse tree. So what will you do? You will try E producing E plus E. Then you will start try E producing E star E like this. So what it means is that in every step, you are actually expanding the parse tree. Or if you look at the other way around, if you start from the leaf, you are reducing the number of terminals and non-terminals at every step as you go to the root. Okay, eventually you get only a single non-terminal symbol. If it is the start symbol, you say yes, the language, the string of that particular tokens is basically accepted by this particular context-free grammar. That means it is an expansion or a reduction type of activity. This is very important to note. So if you are starting from the root, you are always going to expand towards the leaves. If you are starting from the leaves and you are trying to recreate the parse tree in a bottom-up manner, you are always doing the reduction action. Be very clear about this. This is fundamental to understanding how the parsing activity works. So you can see some examples here, although proving whether a grammar is context free or not is more difficult, which we are not going to do here. I think you can revise your automata notes. So this is the concept of derivations. So E producing E plus E, then E producing ID, that was the rule, plus E, and then the last E is producing ID. That means you can generate the string of token ID plus ID from E using these steps. And this is basically known as the derivation of the terminal string ID plus ID from E. If you can do that, that means the string of tokens is a part of the context-free grammar, means it is part of the context-free language generated by the grammar. Okay, this is one way of doing the derivation. This is basically known as the top-down derivation, top-down approach. You can do other way also. You can start from ID plus ID and go backward to come to E, then it would be the bottom-up derivation. So in a derivation, a production is applied at each step to replace a non-terminal by the right-hand side of the corresponding production. So here you can see at each step, one of those non-terminal symbols are chosen randomly, and then the corresponding production rule is applied to produce whatever is needed. Okay. Now here what we have done is we are always applying the production rule on the leftmost non-terminal. You can see like E producing E plus E, then between the two E's, we are choosing the leftmost E. Okay, so this kind of derivation is also known as leftmost derivation. This is a very important term. Okay, so leftmost derivation is a derivation where the leftmost non-terminal is handled first. Similarly, you can have rightmost derivation, which is also very important in parsers. In general, you will not see that in push-down automata or the things you have learned in automata, but in compiler, in fact, a large set of parsers are accustomed to handling strings which are generated out of rightmost derivation. So if it is a rightmost derivation, can you tell me what would be the sequence? Let me open up a drawing board. That would be easier. So this is E deriving E plus T. So instead of leftmost, if we do rightmost derivation, what would be the sequence? Can anybody guide me?
E plus E into E.
No. E plus, yeah, right. Then?
And then it will be replaced by ID, the right one.
Which one? Right one. Okay, rightmost one.
Then the second E from the right one will be replaced by ID.
Okay, this is basically a rightmost derivation. If you did leftmost derivation, the first E will be replaced, then the second E like this. Okay. But if it is a grammar which is known as unambiguous grammar, as we will shortly define, whatever way you produce the actual terminals, you will always get the same parse tree. So whether you are doing it in a rightmost manner or leftmost manner doesn't really matter. Problem comes if you have a grammar where you can have more than one interpretation, means ambiguous grammar. We'll come to that in a while. So you have understood what is derivations, what is leftmost derivation, what is rightmost derivation. So context-free language, it's basically generated by CFG. The string consists solely of terminals. The string can be derived from S. You can see some examples. Set of all expressions with plus, star, etc. Set of palindromes, a to the power n, b to the power n. Okay, who can tell me a to the power n, b to the power n, c to the power n? Is that also context free?
Yes, sir.
Are you sure? All of you are sure that a to the power n, b to the power n, c to the power n is also context free?
Yes, sir.
Pranay is saying context free. Anybody wants to object to that? Okay, I suggest you revise it. Okay, derivation trees or parse trees. Derivations can be displayed as trees. Now, that is very easy. We can easily see here. Like, for example, in this particular derivation, what we have done. So, this is the derivation we are talking about. Okay, so how do we do? So, this is E. Then E plus E.
So you are drawing the parse tree.
Yeah. So this is how the parse tree is constructed as part of the derivation. Then if you are using rightmost, then this is what it should be. Like this. Then this will be ID. Then this will be ID.
Sir, what is the significance of this ID part?
ID is basically the tokens. That is the set of terminals. Okay. In that particular context-free grammar.
Oh, actually, sir, you are replacing all is with IDs at last.
Maybe ID, maybe something else like plus, star. These are also leaf nodes. So those are also terminal symbols, not only ID. So you have ID, plus, and star. These are the terminal symbols here.
Okay, sir.
All right. So now these statements are easy. The internal nodes of the tree are all non-terminals. Leaves are all terminals. We agree. Corresponding to each internal node, there exists a production where the right-hand side of the production is the list of children of A read from left to right. As simple as that. We have done that many times. So these are some derivation tree examples, as you can see. S producing AAS, A producing SBAA, like this. And again, leftmost, rightmost derivation, we have already defined it. Now, the second paragraph. If W is
Sir.
part of, yes.
So the leftmost and the rightmost derivations are different, no?
The leftmost and rightmost derivations are different. Doesn't mean the parse tree or the derivation tree would be different. Okay, we'll come to that in a minute. But yes, the series of rules you apply are totally different. The sequence of rules you are applying are totally different in case of the two things. Okay, please note this. Now, if W is a member of the LG, means it is one of the strings of that particular CFL for some G, then W has at least one parse tree. Please note that. It has at least one parse tree. Corresponding to a parse tree, W has unique leftmost and unique rightmost derivations. So please note that. So if you are using leftmost derivation to create a parse tree for a particular string in a particular context-free language, then you will get a unique leftmost parse tree. Means the leftmost derivation is unique for that particular language. Similarly, rightmost derivation is also unique. There is a unique rightmost parse tree created. If the grammar is not ambiguous, you will always get one parse tree. Doesn't matter whether you are using leftmost or rightmost or something else. You can choose to define something else, like one left, then followed by another right, then left by then right, like alternating between leftmost and rightmost. Still you will get exactly one parse tree, a unique parse tree for any unambiguous language. Means there is only one derivation possible. But there are languages which are ambiguous languages where two or more parse trees are possible for the same string or word W. If such a case exists, then we say that the grammar G is ambiguous. So this is another example where we are seeing the leftmost and rightmost derivation. As you can see, the sequence of rules are applied in a different manner, as you can see. Now comes the question of ambiguity. This is an example of an ambiguous grammar. So note the grammar on the left-hand side. So here, the grammatical rules, as we said, is earlier one. The string to generate is ID star ID plus ID. ID star ID plus ID. So how the left-hand side parse tree is generated? As you can see, E producing E plus E first. Then what it is doing is the leftmost E here, right here, you can see the, okay, let me do this slideshow. Okay, here, this E right here, it is now E star E. So this particular E, it is producing E star E. So that is the rule we are applying here. Then we are applying E producing ID, then E producing ID and E producing ID. This is perfectly fine. Sorry, this left-hand one is perfectly fine, and this is the derivation. Now note the right-hand side. Here, instead of this rule, the other rule is applied. E star E first. Then E producing ID. Then the next A is broken. And you will get ID star ID plus ID. This is the corresponding grammar. So you can understand that with the same set of terminal, same string of the CFL, we are having two very different parse trees. This is an example of an ambiguous grammar. Why the problem comes? Because the grammar, as you can see at the bottom, is an ambiguous grammar. Now, we can eliminate ambiguity. An ambiguous grammar can be rewritten to eliminate the ambiguity. It's not a you can say theoretically correct or provable route. It's more like a rule of thumb. So don't expect that. I mean, if you are asked this question, can any ambiguous grammar be changed to an unambiguous grammar? You cannot really answer to that question. Okay, but yes, in cases for practical purpose, you can say that you can change an ambiguous grammar suitably to make it an unambiguous grammar. Like for example, here is an example: statement producing if expression then statement, or if expression then statement else statement is an ambiguous grammar. Why this grammar is ambiguous? Because as you can see, just by looking at if expression then statement, you have no idea whether an else is there or not. This is what is known as the dangling else property. Dangling else property. Okay. So what is the right way to solve this problem? Any suggestion? How can I solve it? Yes? Why the problem is coming? The problem is coming because you are seeing if expression then statement, and then only you know whether an else follows or not. So what could be a solution which would have avoided this kind of a scenario? Like you already have seen else before you are actually trying whether if expression then statement or not. If you could see this way, see, let us see what is the good way of doing this. Okay, this is an example where you can see two parse trees for the same statement or same language, same string. If E1, then if E2, then S1, else S2. Okay, please note one thing. In general, when we talk about compilers, the rule is basically if E, then S. But you can see here, we have marked E1, E2 instead of E. The reason is we are trying to use a positional notation to distinguish between different E's. This is an entirely theoretical concept. It does not it is not part of the actual implementation. Okay, but by using this notation, a theoretical notation, we are making sure that we understand which E or which S we are referring to. Okay, but in reality, it's nothing but the terminal symbol S. There is nothing called S1. It's still S, but this is a notational convenience. Okay, so whatever you are seeing here as E1, E2, S1, S2, these are all basically theoretical notations. These are all nothing but if E, then S, else S. Now the problem is the last else, where does it match? Does it match with E1 or E2? That is where the conflict is. In the first case, in the first parse tree, as you can see, the else is matching with the second E. And that's why we are expanding the second E later. Okay, before we expand S2. Whereas in the second case, else S2 is matching with E1. So it is expanded first, and then we are expanding E2, where there is no corresponding S1, where there is no corresponding else. Okay, so note the difference. That's why this problem is coming. We don't know where the else is matching, to which E this else is matching. In all programming languages with conditional statements of this form, the first parse tree is preferred. Means you always associate the else with the latest expression and then. So yeah, closest. The general rule is match each else with the closest previous unmatched then, not an earlier one, but the closest one, the latest one. This disambiguation rule you can incorporate directly into the grammar. Why and how? The idea is that a statement appearing between a then and else must be matched. That's what you can say. That means you can say that I cannot have a then and an else within which I have another then which is not matched. So you cannot have an unmatched then in between one then and one else. If you have an unmatched then the else will be matched with that one first, and the first one will be removed. So like this.
So like the if else
Right.
মানে আনম্যাচ if হওয়া চলবে না এরকম
Exactly. Like for example, here you can see this is an unmatched. Okay, so here you can see that this E, then S. This is an unmatched one. This is U. Okay. If you keep like this then, and if you match if this then and this else, then this then is unmatched. You cannot have this. I mean, if your rule is like that. If your rule permits that, then we still have ambiguation. Okay. So a match statement is either an if then else statement, which contains no unmatched statement, or it is any other kind of unconditional statement. So this is what should be a rule. It must not end with an unmatched then, followed by any statement. Then in that case, else would be forced to match this unmatched then. Like here, like this else here, right here, has to match with this unmatched then first. That is the disambiguation rule if you are applying. So now it's very easy. You are having two types of statements, match statement and unmatched statement. So match statement is what? If expression, then match statement, else match statement. Fine. Unmatched statement is what? It can be if expression, then statement. Or it can be a match statement followed by an unmatched statement in the else part. But you cannot have an unmatched statement inside the after the then and before the else. This is what is important. There is nothing problem here. This is easy. This is also easy. This is difficult. This is what is difficult. You cannot have an unmatched statement here. But after else, you can have an unmatched statement. This is fine. But this else always has to match with a match statement. That is the most important thing. This is also, see, this else is matching with a match statement. So this is the disambiguation rule. So now you can see that this is easy. So if E1, okay, let me write on the drawing board. That would be easy. So let us write this. If E1, then if E2, then S1, if E1, then if E2, then S1, else S2. Okay, this is the statement. Now, so if we look at this, then if we do it like this, if E1, then okay. So what is our rule here? Our rule here is, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so if E1, then if E2, okay. So this is the statement. So we have so what kind of statement we have here? Okay, what are the rules we have? The rule says S producing M or Q. M producing if E, then M, else M. This is what M stands for. And U stands for if E, then S, if E, then S, or if E, then M, else U. Okay. So these are the rules we have. So now here we have, this is the one we have to find out what is the corresponding rule. So is it a match statement or unmatched statement? That is the first thing. Can you tell me whether it is a match statement or should it be M or should it be U? So S,
Sir, it is a match statement, sir.
do you all agree that it is a match statement?
Because sir, if sir in each line there is if and then with respect to if there is a then, so it is match statement.
I'm not so sure. Okay, match statement can produce. I have forgotten to give the third.
Contest grammar.
Yeah, it gives the third rule. Sorry, it gives another rule, which is basically other, means it could be anything, any statement for that matter. Okay. So we have if E1, then okay. So let us see. Suppose we try with S producing. So suppose this is really a match statement. S producing M. This is the derivation step. So what should be the next step now? What would be the next step? M can produce this one or other. Other is something we are not going to bother right now. So S producing M, M producing if E, then M, else M. Okay. Now what? Now what would be the next step? We can produce M. So there are two M's here. Okay. So if we say this, if E, then if E, then this M has to be broken down. Okay. Okay, let's do this way. So E1, then M, else M. So if E1, then what is this M going to give me? What is this M going to give me? Yes? We only can have this because already the else is taken care of. So we can say M producing if E2, then S1. Then we cannot proceed any further because the other else is already taken by something else. We cannot change it right now. So we are stuck. Because M cannot produce this rule if E2 then S1. Do you get my point, Pranoy?
Yes, sir.
So our beginning was wrong. What we did was we thought it was a match statement. So it is not a match statement. Let's
So,
try the
sir,
other.
beginning we give then, that's why.
Pardon?
Sir, my main thing is that with every if I should have a then.
With every M, you should have a then and else pair matching each other. Here, if you look at the first statement, we have two thens and one else. So it cannot be a match statement.
Okay, sir.
Match statement means then and else should be paired up. But here you have more than else. So it cannot be matched. So
So,
let's try
pairing will be happen between then and else, not then and if.
No, I don't know. My rule says that. My rule says that if it is a match statement, every then and every else should be paired up. That is the first rule. You can see these then and these else are matched. Whereas in case of unmatched, we have a possibility. So this is not correct. What we have done so far here is not correct.
So, actually, this is a bit confusing.
Yes, I know. This is ambiguous. So it is going to confuse us. But you got my point. The moment you are saying that you are deriving M from S, you are claiming that then and else are paired up. Otherwise, you cannot use this rule, S producing M. Because as you
Yes,
can see, M can only produce pairs of then and else.
Yes,
Okay,
sir. Then and F should be paired up.
right. This is not the case here. So let's try the other one. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Mark it as
Sir, then E and S, sir, if and then will be paired.
so this is
If
not
you
correct.
try to S and U.
Okay, now what should we do? Yes.
Sir, if and then will be paired.
So no, we cannot do anything right now. What we can do is we can say, see, if we apply this now, let's try this one. The second rule for you. There are two rules for you. One is if E then S. The other one is if E then M, else U. Now, what would be the next step? We have to do something
If
about
then, sir,
one. Then M should be deriving a match statement. So we can say this. Then M, else M, that is the rule.
yes, sir.
Else U. Again, we run into a problem.
তাহলে সেকেন্ড লাইনটা একটু হসপচ হয়ে গেল
Now, hotspot hয়নি. What you are doing now is if U1 then you have M. You are expanding M. So M can produce if E2, then M, else M, right?
Yes, sir.
And now you run into problem again. Now you have two else rather than one else. So this is also not correct. You can see two else has come, but in reality we have only one else in the language. You can see in the string. Then S1 else S2. So this is also not correct. Okay,
Yes, sir.
this is wrong. So what is remaining now is the last one. We'll try here. S producing U. This much we have understood. We have to use U. Then we try the first rule, which is if E, then S. Let us stop here because we don't know what is this S all about. Okay. Now this will produce, so this will produce if U1, then S. Now we have to expand S. Now what? We have two choices again, either M or U. So if E1, let's try M first. Okay. as you can see here, now we can expand M. M, it is a match statement. So we can say this: if E2, then M, else M. Okay, and these and these look like similar one. Okay, so you can see if E1, then if E2, then S1, else S2. Here also you can say that if A1, then if E2, then M instead of M. Now you can write other, that means S1, and this M can produce S2. Okay, so now we are actually correct in our approach. So this is going to be if E1, then if E2, then S1, else M, and next statement would be if E1, then if E2, then S1, else S2. So yes, the right hand side is the final one is the correct derivation. Okay, which is unambiguous. The unambiguity came here because what we did was we did not have a single rule for if then and if then else. So for matching if then else, we have one rule which is M. For unmatched if then else, we have just one then, as you can see, the first rule for you, if E then S, or we can have match statement followed by an unmatched statement. That will take care of the unmatched one. Okay, so this is how we have broken down the rules so that the ambiguity is removed. Okay, the next one is left recursion removal. I think we'll talk about that in the next class. We have left. Okay, so left recursion and left factoring, left recursion elimination and left factoring. These are the two things we'll be talking about a little bit, and then we'll see one type of parser which is known as the top-down parser in our next class. It will probably take a couple of lectures for sure.